Good morning. This is a course about baby boomers in the church. So if that's what you're hoping to hear about, you're in the right place. And welcome this morning. We'd also like to welcome the people who are joining us on Zoom. And when we get to the question and answers section of the talk, I'm going to ask you to be sure to wait for the microphone, because the people who are tuning in on the computer can't hear us unless we're speaking into the microphone. So you just have to wait for a second and I'll get to you. I'd like to ask you to remember to silence your cell phones while you have a minute. And this is a reminder that you can continue to enjoy our fall 2022 courses by registering for the second half of the term starting next week, Tuesday, October 18th. So if you marked things in your catalog, that's the day to get online and register. This registration period will open those courses, and the courses will begin after November 1st. Some of the courses that will be available are Bias in Media, Technological Revolutions in the Arts, Secrets of Our Solar System, and Electric Vehicle Charging in the US. Timely. And those are just to name a few. And you'll be getting more information in your email messages from the HASP happenings. And I just want to mention too, if you have not picked up your HASP review, there's a bunch of them in boxes right behind Ian there. And if you haven't gotten your 2022 HASP review, you're going to want to get one, because it's like free reading material composed by people you know. How fun is that?
I'm on page 82.
Yeah. Okay. Tom's in there. I'm in there too. Yep. Page 31. So I'm going to turn this over to Tom Redick. He's going to tell you a little bit about himself, and then he'll launch right into the program. Tom.
All right. I hope this lavalier is working. Can everybody hear me? Good. Then the online folks can hear me. We have to be online because this is all about how churches need to have online systems too. So I'm going to start my clock, and if I go long, Ian, yell at me. So what is a hybrid? First, I'll define that term. We heard this word a lot during the COVID lockdowns because everybody had to go and hide from the virus, but still get work done. And some folks actually stayed in their workplace because they were essential. And some places just split in two and had certain people went home. And what we have now is a system where, for example, I'm in the Toastmaster group, and we have become officially hybrid. We weren't hybrid before, but we had to go hybrid because some of the people, as COVID was eventually it's still not gone away, right? Some people didn't want to come, and they said, we need to go online. So we got on Zoom and we went hybrid. And I think a lot of the world had to do this to try to still get things done. And maybe it didn't work so well in the schools. We're still going to see what happens with them. But I do think that's an issue that I'll focus on as I walk through this. Did I advance? Do I have to turn this on, or? It is this, right? Well, that got unplugged. Oh, I'll consider Hope College, yeah. Ian is proving the one thing I didn't put in my slides is that you need to have a Zoom master. There we go. I'm forwarded. I think we do have a Zoom master at our Toastmaster club, and thank God for Ian, right? So he's keeping everything moving, because the proof of the principle is that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and just when you need it, it'll go wrong. So what is my key point here? That churches have been going online because of lockdown, and they need to go online because, let's see, that's where the kids are, and they're the future of any church. They're people who will live tomorrow and keep going to church. We've always had the travelers. I'm a traveler. I moved here to take care of my aged father, who was a HASP member. That's how I'm here with HASP. He was a member. And basically, I stayed with my church in St. Louis, Missouri by watching it on my phone. And I was a member of the choir, and I always want to see what the choir is doing. So, I stay in touch as a traveler. I'm also a relocator. So sometimes people move, they relocate, maybe they're in the hinterlands of Bolivia somewhere, and they need to see their favorite minister. And good thing he's online, because they can do that. And they can do it 24/7, 365. They don't have to do it Sunday morning. They can do it Monday morning and Monday evening. And I think the TV preachers caught on to this long ago, and I've represented a few in their nonprofit woes, and I can tell you, they make a lot of money, and churches aren't going to make a lot of money, but they're going to stay alive. And what did COVID-19 teach us, at least in the era of church? Well, the churches can go online, and people do watch it. And school, maybe that didn't work so well, but it's something that we had to do. We need certainly better Wi-Fi to handle our education system. Businesses clearly went into this, and now we're in the era where some folks in the business world are saying, you know what, that really worked better. Let's just stay networked, and we'll have maybe less office space. And I think what we're going to see based on COVID is that if you weren't already a hybrid church that had an online presence, and if you didn't have some dedicated resources to it, you will now. That now there's going to be a necessity of being in the online world. And why is that? Well, church attendance has been declining for quite some time. When we look at these next upcoming generations of millennials, the Gen Zs, and the next one's called Alpha, they're more in the spiritual, not religious category. And that is growing with each successive generation. And they're all online, and that's where churches will have to meet them online. And if they do, they will probably increase their membership and certainly maintain their membership. At the same time, it's pretty clear to me that this hybrid attendance issue could essentially, as it is dampening commercial real estate values, could put a little damper, at least temporarily or maybe permanently, on how many people show up in a church personally each day, each Sunday, right? So it's going to be one of those things, the Chinese have a word crisis that means opportunity, maybe. I don't know. I have a Chinese speaking friend who said, that's a bunch of stuff you people said and you don't speak Chinese. But it's clear it is a turning point for the churches. And it could become a crisis that has them face some challenges, right? But it's something that's going to be necessary. And here is the basic church attendance slide. And I can tell you, COVID made a big dent, and it's not clear how much it's coming back, but church attendance has been declining for many, many decades now. What happened with COVID? Well, we had a cliff, a pandemic cliff, because people couldn't go to church, and a lot of folks hadn't figured out their hybrid model yet. And the church attendance dropped 50%, including with hybrid. And from January 20 to 21, in-person attendance just fell off a cliff. So as we get into 2022, we're starting to see data on where things stand in terms of the comeback, because things will come back and return to normal. But the new data is already showing that we might see a further decline, and that's from generational issues. So in 2020, 47% of US adults belong to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. And that is the first time we ever dipped under 50 in this country. We used to be a majority church country. We just went under 50%. And you saw the other slide that showed you how it's been declining since 1900, and it's down more than 20%. We used to be 70% of us went to church country when your grandfather was going to church, when my grandfather was going to church at least. And the change here is primarily due to the emergence of the nuns, and I don't mean the Catholics in their habits, the NONEs. They are the people who have no religious preference, and they have gone up doubled since 1998, from 8% to 21% since 1998. That's a big rise. And COVID may have created more. So COVID's giving us lessons that we need to learn from how to get people to come in, sit and worship. Here's the list of the generations. I'm going to be talking a lot about them, so I'll introduce them to you one by one. And the greatest generation from 1901 to 1926 is slowly dying out, of course. The silent generation, which would include my father, and who recently passed away in January. They're also but only about 6.5% of the population. Boomers, however, we are the big elephant in the room. We're the largest of these groups, and we have 21.9. Gen X, all the rest are around 20 until you get to the new people, Generation Alpha. Down there, they're the new kids on the block. And they are the hope of a more adaptable and connected, I would underline and capitalize, connected, diverse and empowered generation, because they're going to lead the world's future. So the decline in church membership follows along through these generations. The church membership was strongly correlated with age, and with 66% of the traditionalists, and those are the folks born before 1946, belonging to a church. It was a little higher with the greatest generation. By the time we get to the baby boomers, we're still at 58%. And our kids, the Generation Xers, they went to church with us and they still go to church. But the Generation X has another generation just following them, not necessarily their children, but their cohorts at work. And these folks are down to 36% of the millennials. A similar percentage applies to Generation Z, and we're still waiting to see at adulthood if they maintain that level. So the silent generation had a great church-going ethic. They saved the world in World War II. It was the big one, and it rebuilt the world. And they're strongly interested in personal morality and the near absolute standards that religion can give, and a very strong sense of civic duty. They vote and they do donate. And with them, the marriage was for life. Divorce and having children out of wedlock were frowned upon, and church was very much expected. And I know my grandfather was an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and if he didn't see us in the pews on Sunday, we would hear about it. We'd sure not be better playing golf or baseball. So in the boomers, I mean, it's in the title, so I better talk about the boomers, right? These folks from the 60s have a different ethic that emerged in the 60s. The yuppies in the 70s had their own ethic, right? But we all rejected our elders' values. The greatest generation didn't give us our values. It was more of a free love and a nonviolent protest that is triggering violence. We saw the arc of history give more credit to gays. There's certainly something that's happening in the world about that. We had an ethic of buy it now and use credit. We're the tech generation. We invented technology with the help of some children. And we went into working mothers. So the full-time mothers had lots of stuff to contribute. And we now have leaders of the world who are women, right? Didn't see that in the greatest generation. And we may have gotten too busy for neighbors, but we had a big desire to reset the values. So there's this ethic that persisted from the 60s, and a sense that a church will help their kids cope and that they'll be more receptive to various forms of religion. It was a very ecumenical generation. So that's your boomers. Now they're having kids. Gen X were the latchkey kids, the ones that were coming home with a key and opening the door because mom was the CEO of Xerox. You know? And they, as a result, they're very entrepreneurial. They're very independent. I mean, these are the Facebook and the Google czars. They worked on the transition to computers, and boy, are they okay with zooming into church or work, right? They tend to be much later to marry than the greatest generation or the boomers, and they're much quicker to divorce. They tend to be a much more skeptical generation. Maybe they're even a little self-absorbed from watching their phone all the time, but they're not big joiners. And we still see 66% of these folks that are still going to church. The millennials start in the mid-90s, and they were little kids when 9/11 happened, and they have these helicopter parents who give them high academic pressure. They've entered a job market where there isn't a job for life. There's maybe you find your bliss, maybe, and you work until you find time to get married, and everybody's getting married later and later. They expect a more relaxed work environment, more hand-holding praise, right? They're like, Google has like lunch and yoga. They're very digitally literate. And I can tell you, my millennial will fix my printer with a blink of an eye while I'm opening up the manual looking for page 85. He says, "It's done, Dad. What are you looking at?" So there's certainly kids that are smarter than us with these computers, and they get most of their information, most of their socialization, most of their life is revolving around the internet. And they love that it's there 24/7, 365 as a online friend and mother and father. And they did go to church with their parents, about 66%, but they dropped down to 50% as adults. And the other 48% are post-Christian in their beliefs, thinking, and worldview, which we're not sure what that really means. The Z's started let's see. I have the wrong number for these, Generation Z. They're after there should be a break between the 96 and the 2015. They're in the middle of the 2000s. So the first mobile phone at age 10 years, 3 hours a day, 9 hours a day, these are the people who really grew up with their smartphone, and social media is everything. It can drive you to suicide in that era. They grew up with a war going on all the time. The 2008 collapse of the finance, and they will probably mostly use digital finance. They're very values driven, however. They identify with causes. They will support only organizations that sell, fair trade and sustainable materials. And we are now up to 36% of these folks are in the none category. And if they do attend church, it probably will be on their phone most of the time. There was a good book written about post-Christian, James Emery White wrote this, and he talks about our squishy center. And that's the folks that are not the diehard church folks. It's the folks who go to church on holidays and maybe more. And that squishy center always follows the majority. And if that squishy center tilts toward the nuns, then the squishy center, which is the big majority in the middle, could be shifting to secular. And his theory is that we are going to be shifting to a post-Christian where the squishy center, goes to 70% of nuns or something in that category. So that's the crisis point we're at with churches, that there is this squishy middle that we need to bring back into the fold. And Gen Alpha is not going to be helping us bring them back. 50% of these children are non-Hispanic white, and so half are not. But 96% of them believe people should be treated fairly, that there's a strong equity idea here. And they also don't like guns much because they are getting shot at. And 95% of them are climate crusaders. So you don't see the Fox News watching climate denying Tucker Carlson followers. They're the 5%, I guess. The other 5% are stuck in some hate-filled corner, and but they're trying to escape. So there's been this great wealth transfer to these children. Millennial consumers represent the highest spending generation, a $1.4 trillion tab. Part of that's just inflation, of course. And they survived once in a lifetime economic crises, and they basically are inheriting a huge amount of money. And Generation Z will generate 33 trillion in income by 2030. That's basically a quarter of all the global income, and past the millennials and their spending power. And God only knows where Generation Alpha is headed, but they'll probably have even more cool inventions and more billion-dollar balance sheets. And we are now entering what Chris Dawson calls the seventh age. And he was a writer in religious circles who talked about the seventh age world with this economic uncertainty, global instability, huge technological advances. These just shape the whole society, right? And we have parallel demographic transitions, both ethnic and religious and sexual and gender preference. So we're going to see, and by the way, I'm a big Tolkien fan, and yeah, this really influenced J.R.R. Tolkien. He read Dawson and thought it influenced his work. We'll see the shift of the center of Christianity when the big squishy center pivots. Part of it's going to go into New Age or Latin or Islamic thought. And we're going to see a radical change in family and marriage. There has certainly been more recognition of gay marriage, and multi-parent children are more common now. And what Dawson projected was a cultural context of functional atheism, and that just ignored the nuns. And as when you pair Dawson with the other writer about the squishy center, you can see that we have essentially an arc of history that's shifting away from religious belief. And this is the by race slide. So the dot on the top are Blacks who were very church oriented in 2007, and then slowly teetered down up there. So, and they're going down from close to 90% in 2007, right? But as we look at the white adults, they're this dot here, the smaller dot below. They're lowest of all. Hispanic adults are the solid green line in the middle. They kind of follow along, like a little higher than the whites. So it's pretty clear what we're seeing over time in the last 20 years is a steady decline. And well, not so steady, it goes in fits and starts. And in every race. And these are the folks who attended within the last week. This is a snapshot that just shows the same decline. It means they're going less frequently. And the change in church memberships, essentially going through the same transition down. And the millennials are a steep decline, as you can see. And this is the nuns. So the nuns, what have they been doing? They've been growing by leaps and bounds. And they started over here with the green traditionalists. That's the older folks. There's not as many nuns, of course. And when you get to the baby boomers, that's us. We're the purple one in the middle, and we get up to 11% nuns. And it's going up. 2020 would be much higher. But with the millennials, they started out at 22 and they're just going up even steeper. So you can see the trend toward being a nun is growing. What are each denomination struggling with? Well, Catholics are down 18 points from 76 to 58. Protestants also down. What we don't have is good data on every little evangelistic congregation. And they may be growing, we'll see. So what are we looking at in different places? So the Black adults have a high proportion of Christians. That's compared to the general population, right? but their affiliation has been on a rapid decline, down from 89% and into the 70s. 15% of the Black Americans now are nuns, claiming they're atheist or agnostic or have no faith whatsoever. The church membership among Hispanic Americans was at 37% in the 2000 and last COVID era. 37% among the lowest for any major groups, and that started before COVID. Half of the Black adults have read the Bible outside of church in the past week. That is better than the 33% of the national average. And Hispanics read the Bible, but not nearly as much. Whites are even lower. 2017 Gallup study asking everybody, well, why do you go to church? What's in it for you? The number one reason was sermons. There's some good content in sermons. The second thing, we have kids. We want to bring them in and have them go to Sunday school. The third thing would be the community outreach. Oh, they have a food pantry. They do things for the homeless, whatever. And the fourth, but it's not the first, was that there was a dynamic leader. And there's no doubt that a very good, dynamic, charismatic church leader is a big factor in coming to church. The Protestants are declining in the church membership, but there is a split in the Protestant decline. So it's much smaller if you are a evangelical, conservative, vaccine hating, gay bashing, this corner of Protestantism could be rising while the other declines. Now, there's definitely been a COVID impact on everything we do in church. And even the folks who are in the boomer plus category are much less likely to attend in person now than before the pandemic. It's a 10% drop, well, more than 10%, but from 41% to 32% of us go to church. A similar drop occurred from the 18 to 34-year-old. And the only people who seem to have equal or exceeding COVID church attendance were evangelicals. With the Black churchgoers dropped off a cliff from 51% down to 29%. And only half as many are attending with family after COVID. So there's a lot of attendance that needs to be made up after the COVID effect. In terms of giving, large and small churches are both finding less giving. It's been declining along with the religious belief, of course. But we still have 60%, 3 in 5 Americans say they're 62% donated to religious causes. That was in 2001. And it's going down now. The post-pandemic number has fallen to 44%. But we still have 81% of them donating to some charitable cause, whether it's Planned Parenthood or God knows what, right? So it's not that they're not giving to church. The arc of history is definitely evolving toward the rainbow. So the percent of US adults who identify as something other than heterosexual has doubled in the last 10 years based on just acceptance. These are people that are coming out. And this will be a huge dividing line in the future growth of churches and the struggle of churches to get people in the door. It's something that is one of those big factors that probably will cause some churches to grow and others to struggle. And it's all wrapped up in scripture. So it's going to be a tough nut to crack. But I can tell you the next generation, the generations coming after us, increasingly identify as allies of the LGBTQIA. At least 2/3 of them would say, I am an ally of the LGBTQ. And this is a quick bar chart showing how much more they are accepting of homosexuality than the rest of them. And the mainstream churches continue to have divisions. So I can speak for on behalf of the United Church of Christ, of which I'm a member. Yes, we have non-open and affirming congregations, and we have open and affirming congregations. And depending on where you live and where you decide to go to church, you're going to not have gays accepted. And even in my church in St. Louis, Missouri, which was an abolitionist church that was very into its social causes and its values and went open and affirming, lost 11% of its population, but said, that's okay, don't let the door hit you on the back. When they had a lesbian minister, it caused a huge ruckus. And I had a lot of good friends who didn't like her. And they didn't like her, I know, because they were homophobic, but they wrapped it up in something else. So it's a big struggle that's going on and still going on here in Holland. So just a quick snapshot of different churches that have homophobic concepts. The Seventh-day Adventists are very no gay marriage, gay sex sinful, love the sinner, hate the sin. Mormons are still on a high horse of, I have a nephew who is wooed by the Mormon church, and then he came out as gay, and then they kind of parted ways because he was told he could not be gay, or he had to be a celibate gay. Baptists, I have a cousin who's a Baptist, and she has a son who I'm pretty sure is gay, but he's not coming out because he is suicidal, and we don't know what's going on with him. But she's not gonna like it when he says what everybody's gaydar has been beeping, beep, 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 and she's not getting it. So the fundamentals love the sinner, they hate the sin. And this is a quote from one of their websites. Bruce Jenner is still a man. He's not named Caitlyn, right? Homosexuality is still a sin. Well, the culture may change, the Bible does not. And I think there's a mistaken reading of the Bible. I'll get to that later, but these churches are going to struggle to be relevant to the majority. There's 2/3 of these kids are allies. They don't want to go to a church that says it's a sin. And that presents a challenge to those churches. And what does the Bible say about homosexuality? Well, I've read up a lot on this because my father was made himself an expert on it. He was a HAS member. I don't know if anybody knew Milton Redick, but if you got him started on this, you couldn't get him to stop. So he went to many a conference and studied this extensively, and he created kind of a logic tree. So Milty's tree is based on Jonah, who had a little tree grow around him. Remember Jonah, after all his struggles in the whale, took a nap in a tree, grew up and covered him. And this logic tree told the Hebrews, even your worst enemy you need to love, which is a very Jesus kind of thing showing up in the Old Testament. And he believed that this is the dominant principle of the Bible, both in the Old Testament, the dominant principle, and in the New Testament. And John, just before the great John 3:16, which is shown at the football games, right? Just before that, it says, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know, no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. Now, when you read up on this a lot, you'll see that Christ used the term raka, which could mean faggot or effeminate. And scholars try to stretch this to say, well, yeah, maybe gay, Christ actually meant gay people, but I don't think you need to go there. The logic tree of, okay, we love everybody, and that's in the Old Testament, right? Right next to Leviticus, which has that we hate gay homophobic line. There is a more dominant term. Love everybody means you can't do that. You can't murder. You can't gay bash. Because abomination put to death, that's a gay bashing order in the Bible. So it's pretty clear to me that we've got a Bible that people are reading and not doing a very good logical acceptance of Christ's and the Old Testament's order to love your neighbor. But I've told you what, I've got a cousin and I try to tell her this and she's not buying it. My minister doesn't say that. So, okay. So in Holland, there are open and affirming churches. I figure I'm in Holland, I should talk about what you've got going on here. And the inclusion aspects are still being worked out in Holland. 150 churches are in Holland. 10 will marry and ordain the gay person or maybe even have a gay pastor. And in the heart of downtown Holland, you have people at First United Methodists that risk their jobs after opening their congregation to gay marriage. I mean, when my church opened its doors to gay, they lost 11%, but here in Holland, we actually had ministers risking their jobs. So what's happening in the big congregation? The Methodist delegates met and voted in February 2019, just before COVID took over. And they voted to maintain bans on gay clergy and same-sex marriage. Even though shortly thereafter, a straw poll, 4 months later, showed that 2/3 of Michigan Methodists prefer full inclusion. So there's a big divide between various states that have majority allies of gays. And it's pretty clear it's going to take us years to figure this out. The Holland branch of this church has endorsed the LGBTQ policy. But this did lead to a split off, a new church, the Global Methodist Church, in 2022. So we're seeing churches divide on this question. And when they divide, they're basically telling future generations of members that we don't care about you. This is what's happening. Out in Faith is this monthly meeting with supportive pastors. They meet at the Lakeshore Community Center. And they had a link, but it didn't work, but I've got one in the slides here, and these could be shared with anyone who wants to get them. They'll be on YouTube, I'm sure. And a quote from their page says, "We host support groups like Gender Safe, book groups, game nights, movie nights, and programs like Out in Faith." And out here means you've exposed your gayness to the world. This is the director, Jeffrey Sorensen, and he's worked at various aspects around the state, serving on several boards. And out on the lakeshore, he's basically responsible for the community center's operations. And really hope this group will help give gay kids who are not being treated nice by their own family a place to go. This is the board. I don't know if you folks know some of these folks. And they're connecting students from Holland, West Ottawa. This is very broad reach, all the way out to Hudsonville and Zeeland, Jenison even. So what are the open and affirming churches in the Tri-City area? St. John's Episcopal up in Grand Haven has a very open and affirming policy, and many gay members that I've met. In Fruitport, I was surprised to see there's one of our United Church of Christ is homophobic, but there's an open and affirming one in Grand Haven. The Unitarian Universalist Church was early on adoption of the rainbow, and they're open and affirming. And they also would have an open and affirming Wiccan join their church, so they're not as Christian as some. The C3 gathering in Grand Haven is an open and affirming, completely non-Christian group. So what is keeping kids away from church? Why is there a decline in church attendance? They need to, first of all, find a church that fits their beliefs, because that is what church is all about. And if the belief is homophobic, they're going to be wary of that church. The second question is, should we attend in person? Could we just watch it on our phone? And churches hoping to attract these folks need to modify perhaps their belief set, particularly on gay issues, or their ability to hybridize and make sure everything's available on somebody's phone. And to try to bring them in person. I don't know if it's things like a speed dating. I'm not talking about making dating actually, but movie nights, pizza, popcorn, garden clubs. There's things you could do that they actually want to come to. And you just have to have a youth pastor type person who understands that and make sure we attract them to, because they still go out. They don't sit home and watch their phone all the time, but it's a tough nut to crack. And the opium of the masses lives on in China. So we have 5 religions allowed: Buddhist, Catholic, Tao, Islam, and Protestant, but it's very tightly monitored. And I wonder if the US will be kind of divided between that and the French, which has a very laïcité, secular experiment going on. The nuns kind of run things. The Native Americans have ideas that we should follow here. They go back for 7 generations forward and 7 generations backward. And that means my grandson would need to know what my Civil War great-grandfather really thought about life. And our grandkids have an interest in what their great-grandkids are going to be doing. That certainly brings up the question of climate change and some of the arc of history questions like LGBTQ, which is evolving toward a more just mean. We got plenty of toxins. I've litigated toxic torts. We won't bring them into this, but there is a challenge that Native American religion might rise to meet. There's an excellent book I recommend, The Braiding Sweetgrass, that illustrates this Native American ethic. So the Unitarian Universalist model is one that accepts everybody. So they certainly are not homophobic too there, but they also have Wiccans and Hindus, and anybody can go. Unitarian Universalist was, of course, early in accepting gays, and they were the first denomination that accepted gay ministers in 1969. So this is where a doubting millennial or Gen Z may end up. The Latter-day Saints are out there in Utah and are certainly clinging to their homophobic. They also have racist problems that they're still getting rid of. And they believe gender is biological, so trans members are not allowed in. And they're still out of sync with the rainbow movement. Scientology, I will briefly discuss this strange and weird cult. But it's this kind of thing that can attract a kid who is strayed from Christianity. So this is a very expensive cult because they go through these costly auditing processes that make them clear. And they have these bizarre beliefs. Once you get into the upper reaches of their beliefs, that if you pay enough, you find out, wow, it's all about aliens that invaded volcanoes and were spewed all over the earth. They have gay members, but they also have a little bit of homophobia. So Hindu is a $1.5 million religion. The Pew Forum had surveyed them and found that 24% of Americans believe a Hindu concept of reincarnation. So where is that living? In Christianity? I'm not sure. 66% of Hindus accept gays and transgenders, so they are more attractive to the millennial generation. If you also add the vegetarian and nonviolence, you might see some percentage of millennials and Gen Zs and alphas ending up here. But they are believers in God. So 88% of them believe God made the world, right? So Buddhism has a lot of good meditation. Mostly it's Southern California. And they actually believe Buddhists came to America in 400 AD. So you got to buy that. And Thoreau actually wrote about how much he liked the contemplation and the forsaking of work. So their ethic is kind of a Thoreau ethic. And I have a millennial daughter who is a practicing Buddhist. There's proof they might be gravitated. So basically, I've been talking for 45 minutes, and I will conclude with this slide. The hybrid church is definitely here to stay. And it will expand when folks figure out how to reach out and find these people. But in the short term, there's going to be an undermining of attendance, and we have to figure this out if we're going to get enough eyeballs on what we believe. And we have to think creatively about how can we attract the younger folk. You know, I've mentioned the gay issue, and that's going to be certainly one that brings them in and turns them away. We also have an issue with Sunday school. I mean, Sunday school for many years has been discussed as something that is struggling to find its way. So we're gonna have to figure out how, when they have kids, they want to bring them to church, because that keeps people coming. And get a good youth minister. That's a good way to do it. Now I did have a later version that had some links. So if you needed a later version with the link slide, I don't think we got that in. And it has links to different groups that have done studies of this, and we'll make sure everybody gets that slide. So I hope I've talked long enough to keep you entertained, and I do want to have a lot of time for questions, because this is something I think we all want to talk about. So there is a microphone, and remember, the hybrid people need to hear us. So respect the people with hearing disabilities and that are just online and can't hear anything until you talk into a microphone. So any questions for me on this? Yes, sir. And please identify yourself before you go on.
Yes, my name is Rick Byrne. I have a curiosity question, and this comes from a good, longtime close friend. Steve, born in 1945, discusses Alma, Wisconsin, 1955. He is a Catholic deacon now, but he said in Alma, you were two things: Lutheran or Catholic or excluded, because
Yeah.
And you sure didn't date across those lines. If you were a Catholic, you dated Catholic girls. If you were Lutheran, you dated Lutheran girls. But he pointed out that the highway, while the main road through town was paved, the other roads were dirt. It was going to be another 2 years, 1957, when television arrived, because they were halfway between La Crosse and Minneapolis. Is there anything to Steve's story that sort of shows faith? I mean, in 1955, in the period he's discussing, there weren't a lot of things to do in that town except go to church. Now
Good
you've got
point.
the computer, now you've got television, you've got other things
Mhm.
going on. Am I on the right track with your talk?
Oh, yeah, I think the internet has given people part of the reason we're seeing the drift away by the younger generations is they have a lot of distractions. So you didn't have those distractions. Also, they've let go of those ideas. Like, I was raised by an Irish grandfather. Well, not raised, but I had a mom and dad, but he was next door and he made us work and hear his ethics as an education. And boy, dating a Catholic was not allowed, right? My oldest cousin, male cousin, married a Catholic. He said, it will never work. It's worked for like 50 plus years. So it's something that I think dies a peaceful death, because we have more, first of all, more things to do, but also there's this arc of ethics that's just evolving away from those negative things to more positive embrace of what I think is a Christian idea. Love everybody, right? Including the Catholics, and really love them, marry them, right? So go ahead. Any other question? That was a good question.
Tom, we have a question from one of our virtual attendees.
Okay, we'll do that while you're getting your microphone in.
Perfect. Question is, what do you believe is the impact of politicization of the church and the church has upon church attendance as it relates to the increase of nuns? Your description of nuns.
Well, the politicization is an aspect that really doesn't live in all churches. And I have seen startling stories of ministers going on a pulpit and saying vaccines are the devil's work, right? So there has been a politicization that in the age of COVID aided this anti-vaccination movement, which that was politics in the pulpit. They've also had many speeches about gays. So that's also become now a political thing, because we have to have laws protecting them because of the homophobia. So yeah, politicization is something that actually might even lead to some attraction. Why were these the ones that grew during COVID? Maybe it was that they were attracted by these ideas of politicization. So there may be that is a way to maintain members in times of trouble, is have a very contrary view and politicize your pulpit. We'll see. So I hope that answered the question. Yes, ma'am.
Terry Holden, I have a question. Are there any statistics related to membership having to do with the continuity of the leader in the church. I have a brother-in-law, for instance, in Portsmouth, and they've been looking for a new minister now for over a year. And he said that's not uncommon to find someone. And I wonder if there's any relationship with membership and this continuity of a minister coming and going. You have an interim minister. Is there any really connection to the memberships in the churches?
Boy, I don't know such data, and since I was involved in my minister in St. Louis being kicked out for being lesbian, and we had to have a new minister, right? And it took us a couple years. Okay. It's something that we didn't see any good studies that gave us any guidance, whether this is happening a lot or if it's something that there may be some studies, but you'd have to pick a good research question and have some PhD student follow it, because as far as I know, no, you lose a minister and you hope somebody else shows up that will last a while.
Tom, we have another virtual question.
Okay.
If I can share on their behalf. Do you have any thoughts or any data from your research that has given discussion on the physical proximity of gathering impacting faith itself? Has faith increased as people have stepped away from church, or has faith decreased as people have stepped away from gathering together as a group?
Well, faith is a question of discussion and not of necessarily networking, right? And I do think you could say that by going hybrid, you get to have more eyeballs on your idea, and you get to have more conversations that go through that social media pipeline. So in a way, it is certainly something that could grow the spread of faith, right? If there is a receptive audience. And as I said, there are certain barriers that if you have a conversation, and like if Mormons love to evangelize, but they always run into this question with a kid like my nephew who says, wait a minute, I'm gay. So I do think that the benefit of meeting in person is much more than just the faith. The faith is not the number one thing. People go for kids, they go for networking, they go for just because their friends are there, and maybe their belief goes in and out, but they're there and there's a warm and receptive audience for their stories or whatever. So, you can see that the faith issue might be empowered by this hybrid aspect because it doesn't need to have an in-person meeting. And it's just a good idea that can grow. So like, I'd love to send out a Milty Tree faith, podcast of why gays are not to be bashed by the Bible, even though the Bible says bash gays. It also has an exit strategy to this tree that grew, right? So anyway, I do think there's a divide between the meeting that matters for various reasons and the meeting of minds that only is based on the faith question, right? Other questions? These are good questions, I must say. Yes, ma'am.
I'm so glad you mentioned what you've just said about what we might call the socialization of being together with people of a like discipline, a like understanding of the Bible. But I think with what I perceive, the younger generations particularly seem so bent on entertainment. They want to go places, they want to have a good time, but they want to have it speaking to an entirely different level than when difficulties come. And when we see the horrendous rise of mental illness and all of the emphasis on that, I think there's a correlation.
Oh, no question. I mean, we can see I have friends who are psychologists and school psychologists too, who talk about how it isn't just the COVID lockdown. It was that they all went to the media, and the media was already causing a lot of problems because people who build their life around social put too much value in what everybody said about it on Facebook, right? And then you are suicidal for that. I mean, that's just a bunch of dots on a page, right? So there's no doubt that we're dealing with particularly post-COVID, a generation that's going to have mental issues because of the environment in which we put them and the environment in which they live. And that is the core problem with school online was that, it's great. It might, if they pay attention and they don't get depressed because they're not actually having the socialization and meeting together. So we are an entity that needs to get together with people. And that's how we learn. It may be how we work best, although there's certain areas of work where maybe that's not true. So I think we have a lot to learn about how to keep our children safe from everything that, and keep them in church might be a helpful way, but we still haven't figured out how to entertain them, because they can just go on YouTube and, you know, I mean, when I teach at Western, we put the phones in a big box, you know, because we don't want all these millennials checking their phone instead of checking the content.
While Amy's walking over, we do have another question from our virtual attendee, Tom. Pastoral stress and burnout is on the rise. More and more pastors are leaving the pastorate. What do you believe underlies this beyond what you've already expressed?
Well, we've just lived through a very difficult period in our human history, and burnout is something that has a lot of factors, right? And I think we're looking at pastors who are having to live in a very difficult, you know, hybrid environment that can challenge them for various reasons, and they might be victim to the same sorts of problems that are hitting the kids with, because they tend to be more isolated and they don't have the big crowd coming to meet them every week. So, you know, I'm not surprised that there is this rise. It makes sense, and I think the answer is to have congregations that they can talk to.
Thank you.
Hi, Sherry Palan. I have the mic.
You have the mic.
I have the mic. You talked about churches that were basically open and affirming here, and you know the percentage. How do specifically millennials, I'm thinking of my boys who move into new communities, my sons who move into new communities, how do you discern a church's standpoint on that? Because oftentimes mission statements are vague and you don't know to what level they are or aren't aligning with your beliefs. So how do they practically find out, you know, trying to find a church takes time, right?
Yes, it
So
does.
if getting in a community and then finding out and then starting over, and is there a quick way to find out what
The quickest
church
way I
stance.
know is queerchurch.com. There is a queerchurch.com, because we had a big debate one way
Okay.
confirming, do we want to be on queerchurch.com?
interesting?
So you start there, and then media usually reports, like when I moved here and I saw that the fruit port was homophobic, I'm not sure how I found that out, but I think it was in the newspaper, but an online reference. So I can't say anything, but you got to Google and you start with queerchurch.com. And then you go to the church and you talk to the minister and find out if he has a logic tree that embraces everybody or one of those gay bashing theories of the Bible. So
Thanks.
next door. Oh, the neighbor thing. Oh, the Nextdoor app, which is a neighbor app. We just had a comment. The Nextdoor app is a neighbor app. I don't know if you've heard of Nextdoor, but it is a neighbor app where you can I got my furniture free on Nextdoor, right? So, yeah.
So you become a member and you can ask questions. What church would be supportive of this? And you get people signing in and you can answer.
Uh-huh. I think we had one right there, and then 2, 3.
I have a unique situation in that I was brought up in Holland, Michigan as a Methodist in the 50s
Mhm.
and looked at my friends who belonged to the Reformed and Christian Reformed Church as a church with just rules of what you could not do. And I said I'd never marry anyone Christian Reformed or Reformed, and ended up as a minister's wife in the Reformed Church. And I can speak a little bit to the stress on ministers as well as this nice man can too. It was very difficult, you know, to always be looking for approval. And back then you had to do everything. You know, there wasn't the youth minister and
Right.
yeah, so it was very stressful.
Mhm.
But then I just wanted to say that I enjoyed being a minister's wife, and I think I was fairly good at it. But now I find myself, as my husband said, the easiest habit to break is going to church. Because now you can multitask while you're going to church as well. I can knit and watch church. But yeah, it's just, I feel very bad for ministers because we expect way too much from them, I think,
Mhm.
you know. they
I
have-
think it's probably the toughest job on the planet, but that's just my opinion. And yeah, I do jigsaw puzzles while I go to church.
So I don't really, I mean, I don't really have a question. I just have
Oh, that was great. Thank you for
empathy
sharing that. Oh,
for people, you know, who are in that situation.
I appreciate your sharing that. And then I think, is anybody keeping track of all the hands raising and priority? Ian, you're the.
Yes, I've been in Holland 5 years and I'm one of those Protestant that married a Catholic, and it was just an uproar in our family, small town in Minnesota.
Yes. Well, you bet.
And we were able to, I was working in Minneapolis, and the church I went to, the minister was very for an ecumenical wedding. And my husband had a cousin who was a priest, and we had an ecumenical wedding back in 1968 with a minister and a priest in a Lutheran church, which was unseen, unheard
Yeah,
of at that
that's
time.
pretty neat.
Anyway, but getting back to this today, we've been here 5 years, and I have searched and searched for a church that would accept gay community. And I'll go to a church and I'll think, oh, I really think I like this church. I'm this, pleased with the clergy and blah, blah, blah. Well, then I start asking, well, gays are welcome, but it's a sin for them to be together. They will not marry them, whatever. So I don't go back to that church. Well, I'm just having a real struggle finding, and what church did you say? United Methodist here in
Yeah.
town?
Yeah, and then next door will probably tell you a couple others.
Next door, okay.
People ask that question a lot, and they generally get 2 or 3 or 4 churches.
Okay, well, I'll have to do
Yeah,
that.
my slide said there's 10 churches, so there must be out there, right?
10 in Holland.
What church did Pat Locke go to? Is that she mentioned? But I think she mentioned, I can't remember what church she goes to, but what's that? Hope Church. And Hope Church is open and affirming? Yes, so Hope Church is a good one. Say hi to my friend Pat. Yes, sir.
Yes, Rick Byrne again. I'm very active in some things in Allegan County, and the county commission had made a decision to take all the COVID money and upgrade Wi-Fi. Excuse me, I didn't think of the word. And they point out places like Pullman and Gunpoint Township, which is way down beyond Plainwell,
Mhm.
had virtually terrible internet service.
All right.
So I
Iowa.
commend the commission on what their decision was to use the money, because they point out in Holland and Allegan it was okay, but that Saugatuck had good service. But is that type of thing going to affect things even further? Because now, say a person in Pullman who couldn't get internet service is going to have the same quality we have here at HIASP.
Sure.
Are they going to all of a sudden say, I can go to church on the internet or go to church in California on the internet?
Sure. Well, one of the things we learned from COVID is that we weren't ready for it on vaccine masks or on the Wi-Fi you need to teach a kid. My son was a teacher in Chicago, and the Wi-Fi stunk in parts of his world. So I'm out in the hinterlands, it was even worse. So what's driving all that is the need to teach a kid. And yes, that means, his mom, who's a busy mom, might just say, I'm going to dial it in for church today and watch online. Yes, I think the trend is toward more Wi-Fi ability. Google is going out and picking towns to Wi-Fi, and it's competition to get more Wi-Fi. Well, it's expanding. The Internet of Things is coming. That's what's driving it. So I have clients who are shipping like a laser around, and they want to have the internet everywhere so they can watch whether everybody drops it, because they get claims when people drop the laser, it doesn't work. So yeah, we're in the world of the web, and COVID did expand Wi-Fi service. So that's another factor. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something I should have mentioned already because that's an important question. I think another hand was up somewhere, but oh yeah, no.
My hand's up. Can I speak?
Yes, you may.
Okay,
Amy.
good. It occurs to me that during COVID, the idea of habit was brought up, and we got out of habit of everything during
Mhm.
COVID. I mean,
Right.
my husband and I just kind of hunkered down at home. And I think that church is a habit. It's a custom that people have
Mhm.
been used to, and now that's been disrupted. So to get back to it, I think is going to be difficult for everybody, and maybe we won't. But
Right.
I also want to say that October is Pastor Appreciation Month.
Oh, all right.
So send a little
I picked a
note to
good
your,
month to do this one.
send a little note to your pastor.
Yes.
They're having a rough time. Anybody else have a comment or?
Boy, these are good questions. There got to be some more. Yes, sir.
I'm John Kleinhexel, retired.
Oh, I'm a good friend of your son.
Oh, you know my son Bob,
Yes.
yay. Well, to call C3 non-Christian, specifically
Well, I'm a Christian
non-Christian
and
has
I go there.
raised a hackle in me.
Yeah, well, I would say I count the gods in the Bible mentions because they still talk about them a lot.
Yeah, well,
I also
God-
count the ums because I'm a Toastmaster, and boy, do they have a lot of ums.
my sense in talking to my grandkids and people in lower generations, I'm 85,
Mhm.
is that everybody who's growing up and wanting to mature is looking for authentic relationships. And it's one-on-one, it's in small groups, it's in churches that are willing to engage, not just virtually over the internet, but face-to-face in person.
Right.
And, you can worship with 20 people or 500 people, but you need to have the personal, person to person. Here's my story. Here's who I think I am. Who are you? What are your stories? What is your story, the story of your life? And to make connections with real people in every generation. And of course, cross-generational as well is a challenge. So I just wanted that's my comment.
No, I agree with you completely. I think going to church in person that's where the value of relationships and friends and people who support you when like your father dies, right? You need support, right? So it's not something that online can deliver, and kids know that. That's why the schools weren't working very well. So
Yeah, I think the whole true relationship thing, having a real interaction with other people is so important. And the reliance now on social media to take the place of that is probably part of the reason why we're having so much problem with mental illness.
Sure.
There isn't the connection
Right.
between other people.
Oh, everybody has the experience of an email going wrong, because the phone call would have worked much better, but the email made them stew and now they're really mad. And you're like, well, what did I say? And then, oh, I should have thought about that.
I
Yes.
forgot something. Being a minister's wife and being in the church for so long, we were in smaller and larger churches, but I saw the church become more of a business, which I think is really sad.
Mhm.
I understand it because you have to have the money come in order to support your staff and everything.
Mhm.
But I think that's one of the things that personal relationship with people that got a little lost in building bigger and better.
Mhm.
And I also have a grandson who is gay and a daughter who sings in the gay men's choir in Grand Rapids.
She's not homophobic.
Which is odd, I know. But so, when you start being affiliated with people who make a different choice, it makes a big difference in how you perceive the whole community. I mean, all of a sudden, did I want to have a gay son? Not really, because I think it's a more difficult life, not because I'm against it.
Right.
But now all of a sudden, I have to just be accepting because I love him and I love whatever he is. So, and I also have 3 people in my family who can't quite make a decision about if they're male or female. They're they.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, when I did Toastmaster on the logic tree, just that piece. Yeah, I have a good friend, she's Pentecostal up in Muskegon, and she said, my minister had a gay son, so we had to kick him out. I was like, okay, maybe we take the logic tree and save that relationship, but no, that happens.
Yeah, just to reinforce what you said, I just saw, there's a documentary out that I happened to see on YouTube that I think won some awards, but it's about a man who was a 25-year veteran of the armed forces. He was a Marine. He had been in Afghanistan and so on, and was very much a redneck. I mean, he came back to America, went to Muncie, Indiana, where he chose to live, and there was an Islamic mosque there. And his plan was to blow it up. I mean, he wanted to get at least 200 people at one shot. So he went to the mosque to do a reconnaissance mission. And some people came up and started talking to him. And lo and behold, 5 years later, he's been president of that center 2 years in a row. So he said it changed his whole life. So, I mean, the connection is so important, I think.
Mhm. No question.
I read a really good thing online this morning on my phone.
And you're not a millennial. okay.
What? Vote as if your skin is not white. Your parents need medical care. Your spouse is an immigrant. Your land is on fire. Your child is transgender. Your house is flooded. Your sister is a victim of gun violence. Your brother is gay. Your water is unsafe. Because privilege has no place in an election, but empathy does.
Oh, boy. Yes, indeed.
So I think we're, if you don't have any other questions, I want to thank Tom for his wonderful presentation, gave us all a lot to think about. And if you didn't get your HASP review, grab one on the way out. Yeah, it's good. And write your pastor a little thank you note this
Yes,
week.
it's Appreciate a Pastor Month. Let's
Appreciate
go
a
out there and
pastor.
Appreciate 'em.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
you.
you'll be looking for a new one, and that takes years.
Yeah, that's hard.
And many committee meetings.
Thank you for coming.